We wanted to put up a Twitter post from friend of the show, Brianna Joy Gray, that got Emily and I talking about the relationship between the mainstream media, the right-wing media, the left, and the right. If we can put up this first element here. So she wrote, "It is wild to be listening to mainstream coverage of how Republicans are forcing the vote and how the far right is getting major concessions because Republicans can only afford to lose 4 votes when the left was patronized relentlessly for pointing out the squad could do the same." And so, Emily, you picked up on this post because I think there's something psychologically fascinating about the way that the different sides kind of look at each other and the way that they are treated. And on some levels, it's no more profound than the old cliche of the grass is always greener on the other side. Mm-hmm. Because I cover kind of both parties, I've always noticed that each party thinks the other is so much more disciplined. Like,
yes.
You talk to Republicans, they're like, if we could only have the discipline of the Democrats and how they're lockstep. I tell Democrats that that's how Republicans think of them. They don't believe it. Mm-hmm. Like, they think that that's just simply not true. They're like, there's no way anybody could think that the Democrats are disciplined or organized. But the Democrats look at Republicans and they're like, if only we could have the discipline.
It's insane.
Of the Republicans. That's a separate question, but I think it does go to like the way that there's this prism that we kind of see this thing through. So what was your response when what was your first thought when you saw this post?
First, I think both parties should be in much more disarray than they actually are. I would never ever accept the label Republican or consider myself a Republican, but as somebody who's generally on the right, this party should be in chaos and disorder right now. The establishment Republican Party, the leadership is utterly corrupt, and they deserve all of the challenges they're getting. The same is true of the Democratic Party. And the contrast is in what's happening to McCarthy and how Nancy Pelosi, and Pelosi is sort of a singular figure, I think, in her ability to get everyone in line, whether or not you agree with whether they should be in line. She has been able to do that. That's the study in contrast here. What happened to McCarthy and what happened to Pelosi? Pelosi was able to consolidate power, was even able to pick off some squad votes. She had, 15 people vote against her in the last speakership battle. That worked just fine for her. She didn't need multiple rounds of balloting, even though
probably needed more members.
But that helps a lot. But there were people who campaigned on, I'm not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, mm-hmm. and she understood that. She understood it was part of the game, let it happen, and it didn't explode. And granted, yes, the margins are different. That does make a huge difference.
Although not a ton. Yeah.
But they're not that different. It makes a big difference in terms of like the negotiations. But I think both parties should look more like what's happening on the right now in terms of the relationship between the squad and the Freedom Caucus and leadership.
And so I think one way that you read this was Brianna saying that the kind of far right is getting favorable press coverage for the way that they're fighting. But do you see it that way? Like, do you think that the press coverage of this rebellion has been favorable toward the rebels?
No, not at all. I think the press doesn't love McCarthy and they don't love the Freedom Caucus, so that's why maybe it looks more neutral. And that you made a really good point. You were like, listen, MSNBC might say nice things about the squad every once in a while, but nobody over there wants a socialist in the White House. 100% true. There's no question about that. But at least on those sort of superficial cultural issues, if you look at how many magazine covers AOC has been on, it's incredible. And fawning, glowing profiles in those articles. It's not just putting her on the cover of GQ, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, Time. Mm-hmm. I mean, the list is huge, and that would just never happen on the right. But to your point, when rubber meets the road and there's a force the vote or Medicare for all type situation going on, you can see that Pelosi's stenographers over at Playbook or whatever are clearly carrying her water.
Right. And I think there's a couple different things going on. I think you kind of disagree with my interpretation on Fox and the right. And I want to that I was making with Crystal yesterday, but I want to lay it out and get your take on it. So my read on kind of watching the different ways that the different insurgencies within the parties played out was that the media, and Brianna has made this argument too, the media played a huge variable role in it. In other words, in 2010, when the Tea Party breaks out, actually it's sparked on CNBC, and then just covered across the country by Fox News. That's April 15th, was it 2009 or 10, whenever the first, these rallies first start going on, but then Fox from there is just covering the Tea Party relentlessly. It becomes the thing. It becomes the vehicle basically for their opposition.
The overarching narrative
to Obama. Yeah, that they felt like this is what we needed. That the feckless kind of mainstream Republicans weren't delivering. And so then, when you have Dave Bratt beat Eric Cantor in that shocking upset,
the original AOC.
The original AOC. Because Cantor was on his way to being Speaker too.
A young gun.
Just like Crowley was on his way to being Speaker. Fox celebrates that in a way that caused so many House Republicans, and plenty in the Senate too, to then say, you know what, I'm a Tea Party Republican too. Mm-hmm. And so you didn't have to then beat. I think Justice Democrats has probably beaten more incumbent Democrats than the Tea Party beat incumbent Republicans. Yet the entire Republican Party kind of became Tea Party because of the threat of it. Whereas on the Democratic side, there was never any. It's true. It's absolutely true that Vogue, GQ, like all of these outlets elevated the squad, but it was never ideological. It was more like identity related, and also it was like great copy. And to show that there was no ideological content, one of the covers had Pelosi and the squad on there, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't,
Rolling Stone.
Maybe it was Rolling Stone. And so then when the rubber hit the road in 2020, when the Sanders campaign, wins the popular vote in Iowa, wins in New Hampshire, wins a blowout in Nevada, at that point you see where the corporate media actually stands. If you remember that the whole week was spent, because 60 Minutes is like arguing with Bernie about Cuba. It's like, what are we talking about Cuba? We're not talking about Cuba. And then into South Carolina, you have Jim Clyburn endorse Joe Biden, which was a very big deal, but it is a exponentially bigger deal because of the hundreds of millions of dollars of free advertising that got on MSNBC, New York Times, CNN, of that entire apparatus saying Bernie's a Cuban communist. Jim Clyburn says everybody needs to vote for Joe Biden. And you saw the biggest swing in polls in history from, if you look at national polls, from right after the Nevada caucuses to basically a week later on Super Tuesday. Mm-hmm. There's never been a movement that fast, and the only way it can move that fast is if so many of the Democratic primary voters are getting their news from the same place, cable news, and all of cable news is telling them this is the thing that's happening. So that's my argument about how the media kind of hurts the insurgent left, but because there's a right-wing media ecosystem that is independent of MSNBC and CNN, that they were able to boost the Tea Party.
That last part is absolutely critical. I would never disagree that the media prefers Joe Biden to Bernie or Nancy Pelosi to AOC. I think that is abundantly clear. I do think that the identity politics is ideological, so that their big split is on the economic ideology as opposed to the sort of identitarian ideology. I think that is absolutely true. But what's so interesting is what you just said, in that because most of the media is left of center, there is no Fox equivalent. There is no one home on cable news for the left, because it's sort of, they have this giant media apparatus that conservative media, like Fox News is very powerful. I would not disagree with that. And conservative media gets good traffic relative to like what the circulation maybe of the Weekly Standard was in 2002 or whatever. But all that is to say, it does not compare to the mountains of internet traffic that the left of center journalists and editors at CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post, for instance, the Washington Post and New York Times have just both run hit pieces on Elise Stefanik. Compare the coverage of Elise Stefanik. It's not, the coverage of Elise Stefanik and AOC from, quote, neutral publications isn't because one is just objectively more evil than the other. You can make that argument as an opinion commentator. But if you're a neutral reporter Twitter, if you compare the coverage there, it's obviously there's obviously a difference. I think it's really just that because there's this one-stop shop on TV, especially before blogs had really taken off and before social media like Twitter had really taken off in 2010. Because Fox was the one-stop shop, they were able to control the Republican Party
in a way they can't quite as.
In a way the Squad can't exactly say. It's not like every single person is watching, let's say, Rachel Maddow in the same way that every, sort of Tea Party, MAGA type boomer Republican might be watching Tucker. Not every, but that's an exaggeration. But you get this huge swath of the base tuning into TV. That one-stop shop doesn't exist on the left, so I think it's just harder to control.
And I think this is also revealing about the differences between the kind of the ideologies at play here. And so if you assume MSNBC as progressive and CNN was, I don't know if it's going to try, I don't know if it's going to maintain it, but in general, the kind of what conservatives called the liberal media, like they were liberal, like in the sense that they're generally kind of pro-choice, they're more socially liberal, they weren't on the leading edge of marriage equality, but they were going to get there, eventually fairly quickly. But it's not a populist left.
Not economic populist.
Because journalism was a working class profession.
And it's
throughout
conservative
a lot of the 20th
on foreign
century.
Policy, by the way. Like that is 100. That Chomsky critique is 100% true. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yes. It's a very it comes from the same Harvard and Yale, kind of cauldron that produces places like the CIA and the NSA and the other and the Brookings and the foreign policy machine. Yeah. And so you're gonna so it's liberal, but it's never going to be Bernie Sanders left.
No.
And whereas and I'm curious for your take on this. So whereas on the right, Fox News, at least let's say the 2010 Fox News, I'm curious about the one today. I think they looked at the Tea Party and they're like, you know what? Actually, as a Rupert Murdoch style like Republican, they would prefer like a John Boehner type. But they're also okay with an Eric Cantor, and they're also okay with Dave Brett, and they're also okay with these Tea Party types. Like, it's not a threat to their bottom line. Like they're like we can do business with these people. But the corporations that own CNN and MSNBC, the Times, they're never going to say, yeah, we could do business with Bernie Sanders.
No, I mean, they can do a lot of, and Fox, by the way, knows they can do business with Bernie Sanders because their business model has been the sort of Murdoch approach to media. You sex everything up, and it's a lot easier to sex the news up and to increase your profits when you have an incredible story to tell. And again, Fox has simply been better than CNN and MSNBC at picking out those stories. It's not that the other people don't try, it's just that Fox has been very good at looking at like an Eric Cantor story or looking at what was bubbling as the Tea Party started to rise to the surface of American politics and saying, we can sell this. It's a similar thing with Trump. So Rupert Murdoch does not get along with Donald Trump. And I think Roger Ailes saw, and probably both of them saw, the sort of value from a monetary perspective, from the perspective of their bottom line in the Trump storyline. But I think a lot of people read between the lines and see that Trump is not really, doesn't really have the space at Fox News that he used to. And that is probably because somebody doesn't like that.
Right. Once he got out of control, if you remember, they tried to put a hit on him. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Where Roger Ailes called in to, what was it, Megyn Kelly? And said in that debate in 2016, Rupert Murdoch told Roger Ailes, enough. This has gone too far, and it's time to end this. And they were still operating from this paradigm where they could control everything. They can control the base, and they could punish the candidates. And Megyn Kelly started that debate by listing out, if you remember, all of the different like horrific things that he had said about women.
It was a great question.
Yeah, and they were like, we got him, like he's done. And Trump's just like, yeah, I said that about Rosie O'Donnell, and she deserved it. And
That's kind of a great answer, too.
And he just plows forward, and their whole paradigm was broken. They're like, oh, we don't completely control this anymore.
Yeah.
Something new is going on here.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's another really good point. Like, draining the swamp as a narrative, great for Fox. Draining the swamp,
actually
doing it, but I don't think anybody believes that's a real threat, except for Bernie really was the real threat. Like Bernie got so close and is ideologically such a purist in a way that virtually no other politician that has come that close to the nomination actually is a purist to the sort of activist base of their party, whether they're left or right. So that was a real, that was a freak out. It was absolutely a freak out.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There was complete and utter meltdown.
Yeah, don't disagree with that. But then again, you also had a lot of people who purport to be leftists, and I'm not saying who insisted everybody get behind Hillary Clinton, but just look at what's happened to Susan Sarandon. Poor Susan Sarandon in the years since. And she had a really great quote in that interview with Chris Hayes in like 2016 where she was like, well, maybe Trump brings the revolution sooner. And Chris Hayes is like, do you mean that in like a Leninist sense? And she was like, yeah. Again, this is my thing with the squad and I just think the Freedom Caucus has handled those questions of like literally heightening the contradictions, which is a genuine political tactic, much better than the squad has, because the squad has to answer to this incredibly rabid and very powerful, massive media that is often very kind to them. So they can say, they really have more control over them, and that's where it ratchets up the pressure to cooperate with Nancy Pelosi in a way that Tea Party Republicans were rewarded for ousting Boehner. It is totally a different equation. I don't think that means the media is more favorable to the right than the left. I think it just means that it has a different, there's a different set of incentives overall.
On the old heightening the contradictions, there's this great quote. I haven't been able to find it again, but it was from this like Peruvian leftist. Somebody was like, "How are things in your country?" He's like, "Unemployment 60%, trash is piling up everywhere. It couldn't be better.
It couldn't be better.
Yeah. The revolution's around the corner.
It's coming, and that's it. Like Susan Sarandon has been my pet cause since like 2016 because that point she is making is the ideologically consistent point. And
except that Lenin also said you have to understand the objective conditions within which you're operating. And my God, we're not about to have a revolution.
This is amazing. Getting Ryan to defend Lenin over Susan Sarandon.
Well, I mean, Lenin was a clear-eyed revolutionary and understood when it was appropriate to like work within the Duma, work within the system, and when the conditions were ripe for a revolution. It's not like you don't just like take one Lenin speech and then apply it to, all time and all space and all places.
No, I completely understand where you're coming. And that's where, by the way, my argument would be to the Freedom Caucus folks right now, like, take your W. You had the fun with it, but the squad doesn't even have the fun with it. Like, they really don't. And there is so much more fun to be had. And you don't really have to get in line because the incentives that you think are there are actually false. Like, you don't have to be completely obedient to them at every given moment. And you can have more fun with it. And anyway, my advice to the squad, I'm not charging for this, so this is free. Just be more like Susan Sarandon.
There you go. There you go. All right, well, back to more Kevin McCarthy drama. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around.
Yeah, we'll see you back here soon.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.